Colombia is the second most biodiverse country in the world, home to 10% of all life on Earth. But environmental defenders and indigenous leaders are killed for protecting that land. Colombia gave us Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Nobel Prize for Literature, the father of magical realism. But in real Colombia, 972 human rights defenders have been killed since the 2016 peace agreement, and 23% of them were indigenous people. Colombian coffee fills cups in every cafe in the world, a World Heritage landscape. But in coffee and farming regions like Catatumbo, peasant leaders are murdered for resisting armed groups. Cartagena is a World Heritage city. Colonial walls, Caribbean beaches, millions of tourists every year. But just outside the tourist zones, FARC dissidents, the National Liberation Army guerrilla, and the Clan del Golfo paramilitary still rule whole regions of the country. In 2016, Colombia signed a peace agreement that ended the longest civil war in Latin America, and President Santos won the Nobel Peace Prize. But it is the peace that never came. In 2025 alone, 32 political leaders were killed. The world remembers one Colombian face above all others: Íngrid Betancourt, kidnapped by the FARC during her presidential campaign in 2002, held in the jungle for 6 years and 4 months. The day she was rescued, she fled to France. Today, we tell you why so many others had to flee too. You are watching the Human Rights Expert Witness channel. We are country expert witnesses based in London. We write expert reports for immigration tribunals in the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, and the European Union. For this episode, we have reviewed 10 Colombian asylum cases, all anonymized. Peasant leaders from Catatumbo, trade union organizers from Valle del Cauca, journalists from Buenaventura, an indigenous Embera leader, a former FARC ex-combatant marked for revenge, a young woman who refused recruitment by the Clan del Golfo. Today, we walk through every one of those reasons. If you are looking for a country expert witness, our verified list of qualified experts is linked in the description below. Colombia's modern violence began in 1948 with the assassination of liberal leader Jorge Eliezer Gaitan. What followed was called La Violencia, 10 years of civil war between liberals and conservatives. Over 200,000 people died. Out of that violence, in 1964, the FARC was born, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, a Marxist guerrilla army that would fight the Colombian state for 52 years. In the 1980s, two more forces entered the picture: the National Liberation Army, a smaller leftist guerrilla group, and the drug cartels, Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel and the Cali cartel. They turned Colombia into the world's biggest cocaine producer. Then came the paramilitaries, the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, armed by landowners and politicians in the 1990s to fight the guerrillas. In practice, they killed peasants, trade union leaders, journalists, and anyone they suspected of helping the left. Between 1996 and 2002, the FARC controlled almost half of Colombia. They kidnapped politicians for ransom. In 2002, they kidnapped presidential candidate Íngrid Betancourt. She would not be freed until 2008. In 2016, after 4 years of talks in Havana, President Juan Manuel Santos signed a peace agreement with the FARC. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. Over 11,000 fighters laid down their arms. The FARC became a legal political party called Comunes, but the peace stayed on paper.
The reintegration of the more than 11,000 FARC EP who laid down arms and remain actively part of the peace process is central.
The state never filled the empty spaces left by the FARC. 3 groups rushed in: FARC dissidents, fighters who rejected the deal and went back to the jungle, the National Liberation Army guerrilla, still active, still recruiting, and the paramilitaries reorganized as the Clan del Golfo, also known as the Gaitanista Self-Defense Forces, Colombia's largest criminal organization today. They fight each other for coca crops, for gold and illegal mines, for the cocaine routes to Mexico and Europe. The people caught between them, peasants, indigenous communities, Afro-Colombians, social leaders, are the people who flee. And this is where we are today. Now we will show you who is in danger. If you are in Colombia and you belong to any of these groups, you may be at risk. 1. Social leaders and human rights defenders, community organizers, environmental activists, land restitution claimants. 2. Indigenous leaders, Embera, Nasa, Wayu, Awa, and others. 23% of all killed defenders are indigenous. yet they are only 4.7% of the population. 3. Afro-Colombian community leaders, especially in Choco, Cauca, Buenaventura. 4. Peasant farmers, called campesinos, in Catatumbo, Cauca, Putumayo, for refusing coca substitution or resisting armed groups. 5. Journalists and media workers. Colombia is one of the most dangerous countries in the Americas for reporters. 6. Trade union members. Colombia has been the most dangerous country in the world for trade unionists for over 20 years. 7. Former FARC ex-combatants who signed the peace agreement. Over 400 have been killed since 2016. 8. Political leaders and candidates. 32 killed in 2025 alone, especially in conflict regions. 9. Young women and girls in conflict areas, at the risk of forced recruitment, sexual violence by armed groups. 10. Young men in poor neighborhoods, at the risk of forced recruitment by FARC dissidents, the National Liberation Army, or the Clan del Golfo. 11. Gay, lesbian and transgender people in territories controlled by armed groups. Many groups enforce social codes by violence. 12. Witnesses and victims who cooperate with the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, Transitional Justice Court. If you recognize yourself in this list, keep watching. If you are in a similar situation, you can find a list of country expert reports for Colombia on our website. You can use them as evidence in your asylum claim. You can also find a verified list of country expert witnesses on Colombia. Link in the description. Now, let us look at the 5 main reasons people flee Colombia today. When the FARC signed peace in 2016, not everyone agreed. A faction broke away and went back to the jungle. They are called FARC dissidents, or in Spanish, disidencias. Today, the 2 biggest factions are the Segunda Marquetalia and the Estado Mayor Central. Together, they have around 5,000 fighters. The National Liberation Army never signed peace at all. Founded in 1964, inspired by the Cuban Revolution, it is the last big leftist guerrilla in Latin America. Around 6,000 fighters, mainly in Arauca, Choco, and along the border with Venezuela. Both groups make money from cocaine, illegal mining, kidnapping, and extortion. Both forcibly recruit children and young people. Both kill anyone they see as a traitor or an obstacle.
More than 11,000 men and women from the former FARC EP remain actively engaged in their reintegration into society.
In January 2025, the Catatumbo region, on the border with Venezuela, exploded. Dozens were killed. Over 50,000 people were displaced in just a few weeks. This is what happens when armed groups fight for control of cocaine roads, and the state is not there. When the paramilitary United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia officially demobilized in 2006 under the Justice and Peace Law, more than 30,000 fighters were supposed to lay down arms. Many did not. They reformed under new names. The biggest today is called the Clan del Golfo, also known as the Gaitanista Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. They are not a guerrilla. They have no political ideology. They are a criminal army of around 6,000 fighters, controlling cocaine trafficking, illegal gold mining, extortion, and human trafficking across more than 200 Colombian municipalities. In May 2022, they paralyzed entire regions for 4 days with an armed strike to show the state who was really in charge. Their victims are exactly the same as the old paramilitary victim. Trade union leaders, peasants resisting land theft, environmental defenders, Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities, social leaders, and people who refuse to pay extortion.
In Colombia, where my office documented 32 killings of political leaders in 2025.
Colombia is the most dangerous country in the world to be a human rights defender. Has been for years. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has documented 972 killings of defenders between 2016 and 2025. 23% of those killed were indigenous people. Indigenous people are only 4.7% of the Colombian population. That gap is not random. It is a pattern. Who is killed? Community organizers, environmental defenders, land restitution claimants, leaders of indigenous reservations, Afro-Colombian community council members, peasant association leaders, women's rights activists, gay, lesbian, and transgender defenders, lawyers representing victims. Trade unionists are killed at a higher rate in Colombia than in any other country in the world. Some of the most experienced have fled to Spain, to Switzerland, to Canada when threats reach their families. Many continue their work from exile. Let me give you 2 faces. Francia Márquez, Afro-Colombian environmental defender from Cauca, survived an assassination attempt by armed men in 2019, won the Goldman Environmental Prize. In 2022, became the first Afro-descendant vice president of Colombia. She shows what defenders face and what their courage can build. even from a country that tried to kill them. Berenice, human rights defender, protecting trade unionists and victims of forced displacement, has received death threats for over 20 years. Won the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award. Forced into temporary exile multiple times.
In Colombia, we are reminded of the importance of the participation of civil society in peace-building efforts, notably women, Afro-descendants and indigenous peoples.
Women's leaders, representatives of indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities, peasants, human rights and youth activists, political sectors and members of the private sector.
Colombia has produced some of the bravest reporters in the world, and it has killed many of them. In 1999, journalist and comedian Jaime Garzón, beloved by Colombians for using satire to expose corruption, was shot dead in Bogotá by paramilitaries. He had been working as a peace mediator. In the year 2000, journalist Ginette Bedoya was kidnapped, tortured, and raped while investigating arms trafficking inside a prison. She survived. She fought for 2 decades for her case to be heard. In 2021, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights ruled Colombia responsible. Today, the threats come from FARC dissidents, the National Liberation Army, the Clan del Golfo, corrupt local politicians, and corrupt police. Local journalists in regions like Buenaventura, Choco, Catatumbo, and Cauca are the most exposed. They cannot disappear into a crowd in Bogotá. Some have fled. Investigative journalist Holman Morris received political asylum in Spain after years of threats and surveillance. Others continue reporting from exile, publishing online about home regions they can no longer visit. 2 more categories of people who flee. They are connected, and they are often silent. First, young people. In territories controlled by FARC dissidents, the National Liberation Army, and the Clan del Golfo, children are recruited by armed groups, sometimes by force, sometimes by the offer of money, in places where there are no jobs and no schools. Families who refuse can be killed or displaced. Second, ex-FARC combatants who signed the peace agreement. They were promised safety, land, and reintegration. Instead, more than 400 have been assassinated since 2016, killed by FARC dissidents who see them as traitors, killed by paramilitaries who see them as old enemies, killed by criminal gangs who do not want competition. Third, women and girls in conflict zones. Sexual violence by armed groups remains widely documented and rarely punished. Indigenous and Afro-Colombian women face the highest risk. Women who are political candidates, social leaders, or trade unionists are targeted specifically because they are women.
On the eve of the court's issuance of the first sentences against former FARC and members of the security forces, a process that is crucial for ensuring truth, justice, and reparations to victims. The former combatants, as one of the 2 signatory parties of the peace accord, maintain all associated responsibilities and functions.
The numbers tell you what the courts already know. Colombia is not a safe country for everyone. Internal displacement first. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, Colombia has one of the largest internally displaced populations in the world. Over 6 million people accumulated across decades of conflict. People displaced from their land by armed groups who never went home because home was never made safe. Now, asylum applications abroad. Colombians apply for asylum across the Americas and Europe. The biggest destinations, United States, thousands of Colombian asylum applications filed each year, particularly defensive applications at the southern border. Recognition rates around 30 to 50% depending on judge and case quality. Canada, consistently one of the top source countries for refugee claims. Recognition rates 50 to 70%. Canada's Immigration and Refugee Board regularly accepts well-evidenced Colombian claims, especially from defenders and ex-combatants. United Kingdom, smaller numbers but successful claims, especially for human rights defenders, journalists, trade unionists, and ex-combatants. Recognition rates 30 to 50% with a strong expert report. Spain, the most common European destination because of shared language. Colombians are consistently among the top 3 nationalities applying for international protection in Spain. Other European Union countries, Germany, France, Belgium, Netherlands, all receive Colombian applications, with cases of social leaders and defenders often successful. What these numbers mean is simple. The people who flee Colombia are not a small group, and in the courts that hear them, when the evidence is properly presented, a clear majority of cases are recognized as having a well-founded fear of persecution. Asylum is granted when the state cannot protect you from a well-founded fear of persecution on one of 5 Refugee Convention grounds. For Colombia, the relevant grounds are political opinion, race, or ethnicity. and particular social group. Political opinion, real or imputed, applies to social leaders, ex-FARC signatories, political candidates, trade unionists, journalists, and witnesses cooperating with the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. Race or ethnicity applies to indigenous communities and Afro-Colombian community leaders, disproportionately targeted. Particular social group, human rights defenders, journalists, ex-combatants, land restitution claimants, women fleeing gender violence, gay, lesbian, and transgender people in armed group territory, families of victims. The hardest part of a Colombian asylum case is usually not the persecution. It is the question of internal relocation. Courts often ask, Colombia is a big country, can you not just move to Bogota or Medellin? The honest expert witness answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on who's after you and how far their reach extends. The expert witness cannot accept or reject the applicant's testimony. That is the court's role. The expert assesses the applicant's account against the country situation and provides a detailed conclusion on the risk of return and the risk of internal relocation. In most cases, if the claimed information is accepted by the court, internal relocation and return to Colombia are unsafe for these types of persecution. And if the court accepts the applicant's evidence, asylum can be granted in most cases. This is why a personal assessment of each individual case is critically important. Colombia is a country of great beauty, great writers, great coffee, and great courage. It also has the world's deadliest fight for human rights defenders. Freedom House currently rates Colombia as partly free, and the rating has been declining year after year. Íngrid Betancourt fled to France. Trade union leaders fled to Spain and Switzerland. Journalists like Holman Morris received political asylum in Spain. Indigenous and Afro-Colombian leaders today seek protection in Canada and the United States. The pattern is the same: silence and death at home, or freedom and exile abroad. If you are a Colombian asylum seeker, you need a country expert report that proves your case against the country information. If you are a solicitor, you need an expert who knows Catatumbo from Choco, the Clan del Golfo from the National Liberation Army, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace from the Justice and Peace Law. Subscribe to the channel for the next country in our Why People Flee series. Comment below, which country should we cover next? Share this video with anyone who needs it. This is the peace that never came. Until next time.